What if I told you that the script of female behavior in a collapsing society had already been written, not recently, but a century ago, in the dim cabarets and collapsing banks of the Weimar Republic? This is not a history lesson. It is a mirror that reflects our present with such clarity, such unnerving precision, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This isn't about nostalgia or academic theory. It's about pattern recognition. It's about the quiet power of foresight in a world built on denial. Because when a civilization begins to rot from the inside, when its values collapse and its currency decays, what emerges is not chaos. It is a formula, and the ones who recognize that formula can predict the storm and stand through it. So let us step into Berlin, 1923. Not in black and white, not as a headline, but as something visceral, lived. Picture a young man. Call him Klause. He fought in the Great War. Came home to brief applause and permanent disillusionment. Once a soldier, now an accountant, a man of rules, of order, of spreadsheets and logic. This morning, Klause received his monthly wage, 5 billion marks. A grotesque figure that used to mean fortune. His wife, Greta, smiled. There was relief, maybe even hope. They would buy bread, meat, a bit of coal. But when he reached the bakery, the same loaf that cost 1 billion an hour earlier now cost 3. By the time he left the shop, 5 billion was just paper. Numbers meant nothing. His logic collapsed. His identity as a provider dissolved in his hands like smoke. This was hyperinflation, not just an economic term, but a spiritual event. The ground beneath his role as a man, a husband, a protector, was gone. And in that void, something new began to bloom. Deregulation, not just of currency, but of values, of identity, of loyalty. When a man's contribution no longer holds weight, when his labor is mocked by economic absurdity, he is not merely unemployed, he is obsolete. J.M. Keynes saw it firsthand in Berlin. He didn't just track markets, he watched souls unravel. He coined a term, the velocity of life, to describe the frantic, survivalist tempo that took hold. People, especially women, began to understand that pause meant death. The idea of saving, of committing to a long-term partner, became suicidal. The stable man, loyal, predictable, dependable, was now a liability. Why bind yourself to a man whose life savings couldn't buy a cup of coffee tomorrow? So women adapted, not out of vice, but instinct. Darwin didn't design them for virtue. He designed them for survival. Enter the Weimar archetype. Not the husband, not even the boyfriend. The friends with benefits provider. The man who could offer now, not later. The man with coal, with bacon, with dollars. The foreigner, the officer, the hustler. They were no longer threats to marriage. They were replacements for it. This wasn't love. It was utility. It wasn't lust. It was logistics. And Greta, Klause's wife, wasn't immune. She watched her husband wither. The numbers he once wielded with pride now mocked him. Then she met Fron, a speculator. He didn't work, he bet. On collapse. He wore suits sharper than knives and always carried American dollars. He could get her into places Klause couldn't afford to imagine. The Resi, the El Dorado, the temples of distraction. Greta told Klause she was visiting her sister. She wasn't. She was drinking champagne worth more than his entire annual wage, being promised silk stockings, while jazz shrieked through rooms like a siren calling the shipwrecked. And in that moment, Klause died. Not biologically, but socially. His virtues became his curse. Loyalty was now irrelevance. Stability was a joke. Logic was impotence. He wasn't betrayed by Greta alone. but by a system that had declared his kind unnecessary. This is the emotional signature of the Great Deregulation, the quiet, systematic erasure of traditional male value, not because the man failed, but because the system no longer had use for what he offered. The tragedy isn't in the betrayal. It's in the fact that betrayal became a form of adaptation. But this is only the first mask. When a culture loses the ability to cope with its own decay, it doesn't seek correction. It seeks escape. It doesn't reform. It hallucinates. And so begins the carnival, the inversion. The golden 1920s weren't golden. They were a fever dream, the death rattle of a society trying to feel alive one last time. Cabarets, gender fluidity, open marriages, wild costumes, a liberation so extreme it bordered on parody. This wasn't health, it was a breakdown in drag. Otto Friedrich called it what it was, a collective nervous breakdown. The birth rate collapsed. Abortions soared. Marriage became a punchline. Why build a future in a world that doesn't promise tomorrow? Why tie yourself to one man when that man could be irrelevant by next week? And so the female survival instinct doubled down, abandoned the nest. Chase sensation. Not for love, but to numb the dread. The dread that the game was over, and no one had the courage to say it out loud. Francisco Kramer's study of Berlin women during this time uncovered the numbers to match the mood. Over 60% admitted to having a utility man on the side, not for romance, but for stability. And not the old kind of stability. A home, a future. No, the new kind. A meal, a night's rent, a coat. And they were honest. This wasn't shameful. It was strategic. It was modern. Now look around. Is this ancient history? Or does it feel like Tuesday? Situationships have replaced partnerships. Vacations replace vows. Hot girl summer is no longer a meme. It's a value system. And it's not progress. It's the same Weimar script, playing out with new lighting, better sound systems, and digital cabarets we call social media. The dance is different. The costumes are shinier. But the mask? Identical. And for the man watching, the one who still values order, loyalty, discipline, the pain is not just emotional. It is existential. What do you do when the traits you built yourself on are now signs of weakness? When the carnival laughs at you, not because you're wrong, but because you're real? There is an answer. Some men didn't join the dance. They didn't chase the flickering lights or beg for relevance. They didn't become brutes or beasts. They became oaks in a storm. They trained. They studied. They retreated, not in cowardice, but in clarity. While the world dissolved, they built themselves up, not for applause, but for sovereignty. They became real in a world obsessed with the fake. Because what the Weimar Republic accidentally taught was this: in collapse, the counterfeit is king. Until the fire comes, and then only the real survives. But the fire always comes. The music doesn't play forever. The champagne runs dry, the lights flicker, and the illusion collapses. And when it does, what happens to the women who abandoned the stablemen, the men of substance, the men of silence and spine? They begin to panic. The thrill of the carnival fades. The silk stockings tear. The dance halls turn hollow. The speculators grow quiet. The foreign cash loses value. Suddenly, what once felt like liberation becomes exposure, vulnerability, and fear. Greta, now older and hollowed by the chase, begins to realize something Fron never had. Real safety. Not the illusion of luxury, but the concrete force of presence. Klause, the man she left behind, has changed. His sadness hardened into strength. He is colder now, stronger, his mind sharpened by disappointment, his body by discipline. No longer the soft, crumbling accountant. Now a man with nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to gain. He no longer seeks applause. He trains with Freikorps veterans in back alleys and abandoned parks. He reads. He lifts. He rebuilds, not the economy, but the only fortress that can't be devalued, himself. Greta sees this. She feels the primal current of masculine presence that Fron never carried. Not the glamour of currency, but the gravity of protection, of order, of command. And here begins the next inversion, the betrayal imperative. Because Greta cannot return, not as she is. The contract was broken, the betrayal committed. She cannot look Klause in the eye and say, "I was wrong," and so her psyche performs a trick, an ancient trick. She must recast the man she betrayed as a danger. His strength becomes aggression, his discipline, control. His refusal to dance with the world is now framed as antisocial, abusive, toxic. Because if she admits he was right, she must face herself. And that cannot happen. This is not drama, it's anthropology. A survival adaptation baked deep into biology. Women cannot reattach to what they've rejected unless they rewrite the story. And so they do. The betrayed man becomes the villain. The steady man becomes the threat. His masculine rebirth is not inspiring. It is inconvenient, because it reminds the world what was lost, and what it chose to ignore. The Weimar courts codified this betrayal. In 1928, a woman named Frau Schmidt sought divorce from her husband, not for abuse, not even for infidelity. Her reason? Political incompatibility. He remained a nationalist, while she aligned with the communists. She claimed his views endangered her social standing. The court, steeped in the same ideological rot, granted it. His years of loyalty, his service, his sacrifice, erased. His identity reduced to a political liability. This was not an anomaly. It was a blueprint. Just 5 years later, in 1933, the law for the encouragement of marriage was passed. It promised loans to racially sound couples, but its darker purpose was the legal rapid dissolution of unproductive marriages, particularly those with husbands deemed ideologically impure. The state no longer protected men. It sanctioned their replacement. The betrayal imperative wasn't personal. It was systemic. The women weren't conspiring. They were adapting, aligning with power, with whoever could protect them, not just physically but socially. And when the state decided that certain men no longer fit, it used women, mothers, wives, lovers, to carry out the rejection, to make it moral, to make it legal. The message was clear: adapt or be erased. Today the tools are different. Divorce courts replaced by HR departments, trials by jury replaced by cancellations. But the pattern remains. A man who dares to think differently, who speaks outside the social narrative, finds not only the system against him, but often the women closest to him leading the charge. This is not about misogyny. It's about strategy. The system needs compliance, and it will extract it however it can, especially from those who have opted out. For Klause, there is no return. Greta may feel the pull, the ache of nostalgia for his steadiness, his presence, his certainty, but she will not act on it. The shame is too deep, and the narrative must be preserved. Klause must remain the villain, the cold one, the extremist. Because the alternative, that he saw the truth early, that he was forged by reality while others fled from it, is too much to bear. But for Klause, that rejection is not the end. It is ignition. The betrayal becomes not his death sentence, but his birthright. The final tearing away of all illusion. He owes nothing. Not to the market, not to the media, not to the broken promises of family or culture. He is free in a way no man has been free before, because he has no illusions left to lose. This is sovereign ignition, the moment when a man stops asking the world for permission, when he stops trying to be understood, accepted, applauded, when he realizes the game is rigged and the only way to win is not to play, but to build something else entirely. Himself. No more validation, no more begging, no more bending to a system designed to use, ridicule, and discard him. Klause now sees through it all. He watches the city fall apart, the parties continue, the divorces rise, the loyalties evaporate. He sees the old world rotting, the new one full of digital masks, sterile pleasures, empty words. And he smiles. Because he has what none of them do: clarity. He sharpens his mind like a blade, builds his body like armor. He reads the Stoics, the ones who found peace not in external praise, but in internal power. He studies Junger, who wrote of heroic realism, the choice to be a disciplined force within chaos rather than a victim of it. He trains with other men like him, not in grand movements, but in quiet discipline. No slogans, no manifestos, just grit, just will. They are the men the system fears most, not because they are violent, but because they are sovereign, unreachable, untouchable, no shame to be exploited, no dreams to be hijacked, no illusions left to manipulate. These men have passed through the fire and come out as something else entirely. The collapse did not break them, it revealed them. They do not dance, they do not argue, they do not chase, they build. And when the carnival ends, as it always does, and the world begins to search the ruins for someone to rebuild, they will be there, silent, watching, ready, not to save the world, but to build a better one from its ashes. The irony is almost poetic. In a world that mocks male presence, devalues male provision, and recasts male stability as danger, it is precisely that stability that becomes priceless when the illusions shatter. The sovereign man doesn't wait to be rescued. He does not explain, complain, or seek approval. He builds what the world has forgotten how to value: realness. In his thoughts, his strength, his habits, his code. Klause has stopped trying to save what doesn't want to be saved. He no longer fantasizes about reforming the system or winning back Greta's affection. He doesn't shout at the mask wearers or debate those still lost in the lights of the carnival. He simply moves through the world like a blade through fog, unbothered, unbroken, unseen until necessary. He understands now that the collapse of a culture is not the end of civilization. It is the end of the counterfeit and the beginning of something brutal but real. He finds others, men like him, not by accident but through silent signals, the way they speak or don't, the books they read, the way they train, not for sport but for discipline. No empty bravado, no social media confessions, just an unspoken code that says, we see the game, and we've opted out. This is not loneliness. It is the fraternity of the forged. They meet not in halls of fame, but in forgotten spaces, garages, forests, corners of old libraries, gym basements, places society ignores because society has no use for men who cannot be bought. They train not for a title, but for readiness. They read not to appear smart, but to internalize truth. They fast, they plan. They disappear from public spectacle because their energy is not for sale. These men understand that sovereignty is not a brand. It is a way of being. Their compass is internal. Their joy is not the dopamine spike of likes, applause, or romantic validation. It is the quiet triumph of overcoming themselves, of building a life that cannot be revoked, censored, or reprogrammed. They build what Klause built, a selfhood so rooted, so centered, that no betrayal, no inflation, no ideological storm can unmake it. This is the archetype Nietzsche spoke of, not the comic book Superman, but the Übermensch, the man who creates his own values in the ruins of those that failed, the man who doesn't ask what society allows, but who society fears because it cannot control. The man who, standing amid the ashes, refuses bitterness. Instead, he becomes the blacksmith of meaning. He shapes life on his terms, not because he thinks he will win, but because it is the only path left that does not require the death of his soul. The final lesson of the Weimar blueprint is not the collapse itself. It is that the collapse was survivable, but only for men who refused to collapse with it. The deregulation came. The carnival arrived. The betrayal struck deep. But in all of that decay, there was a hidden forge, and the men who passed through it with eyes open and fists clenched emerged different. They didn't come out to reclaim society. They came out to build in spite of it. Their identities were no longer linked to institutions, to social roles, or to cultural validation. They didn't beg to be seen. They made themselves impossible to ignore, not through volume, but through substance, not through rage, but through restraint, not through protest, but through presence. And now, a century later, you are watching the sequel. You see the deregulation of meaning, degrees that mean nothing, wages that vanish in inflation, roles once honored now mocked, masculinity pathologized, stability reframed as oppression. You see the carnival, dopamine-fueled hedonism, spiritual collapse masked as empowerment, culture turned into a parade of distractions. And yes, you feel the betrayal imperative, the quiet way your principles make you an enemy, the way your restraint is labeled control, your clarity called extremism. But you also have something Klause didn't, the blueprint. You see the pattern. You don't have to walk blind into the same abyss. You have a map, carved in the scars of the men who came before you. Their fall was not in vain. Their silence was not emptiness. It was instruction. It whispers to you, do not beg to be chosen. Choose yourself. Do not try to fix the broken. Build something unbreakable. Do not argue with the tide. Learn to breathe underwater. Master the storm. You are not here to be understood. You are here to become undeniable. Sovereignty doesn't begin when the world agrees with you. It begins the moment you stop needing it to. When you train even when no one is watching. When you speak truth even when it costs you. When you prepare for collapse, not because you are paranoid, but because you are awake. This is not a call to isolation. It is a call to elevation. Find the others. They are out there. In the quiet gyms, in the margins of the internet, in the pages of the old philosophers. They are the men who walk through modernity like ghosts, untouched by the hysteria, unchained by the narratives. They know what you know. That history doesn't repeat, but human nature does. And in every collapse, there is a choice. Break with the crowd, or be broken by it. Klause was never meant to save the world. He was meant to survive it, and then outlive it. So are you. The world may not applaud you. The women may not understand you. The culture may never reward you. But those are not your metrics anymore. Your metric is truth, endurance, quiet strength. Your metric is whether you could be dropped into chaos and still remain yourself. Not a mask, not a reaction. A man. And when the next version of Weimar begins to smoke and groan and shake, when the digital breadlines form, when the dollar dances like the mark once did, when the social contracts collapse again, you will not be surprised. You will not beg. You will not fall into despair. You will have already done the work. You will have already seen it coming. You will nod, not in fear, but in recognition. Because the blueprint was never a prophecy of doom. It was a test. And now you know how to pass it.